This is AUGforums.com Real Talk, an unfiltered, independent perspective on Acumatica Cloud ERP. My name is Tim Rodman, and I want to mention three things in this pre-recorded intro before we get started. First, thank you to our sponsors. Our first sponsor is Repay. Repay offers omni-channel integrated payment solutions for Acumatica users. Whether you are making B2B payments or collecting them, Repay is your full-service payments provider. Power up your payments to empower your business and accelerate the AP and AR payment flow through one seamless integration. Our second sponsor is DataSelf. DataSelf Analytics is a revolutionary reporting solution that enables organizations to make the most informed decisions faster and easier than ever. It uniquely simplifies business intelligence, empowers anyone to build and access dashboards, and delivers critical business insight when and where you need it. Our third sponsor is Velixo. Velixo is an award-winning provider of Excel-based reporting solutions for Acumatica. With Velixo, you can build financial, project, and other business reports in Excel with live Acumatica data in just a few minutes and get the answers you need. If you know Excel, you can do it. Please take a minute to support this podcast by clicking each one of the sponsor banners located at augforums.com/sponsors. Our sponsors track clicks, and every click helps to support this podcast. The second thing I'd like to mention is that I'm always looking for victims. Guests. If you use Acumatica in any capacity, no matter how small, I'd love to talk with you. Check out augforums.com/podcast and click the link near the top of the page to learn more about being a guest on the podcast. Third and finally, I'd love to see you listed on my Rolodex. Check out augforums.com/Rolodex to find out who else is using Acumatica and read the instructions at the top to see how you can add yourself to the list. All right, that's it for the pre-recorded intro. Let's get started. Today is Friday, June 17th, 2022, and this is episode number 89, Generic Inquiry Library Preview. So I'm going to preview in this episode something that I'm adding to my course, and the thing I'm adding is I'm calling it a generic inquiry library. It's just me on this episode. I was lined up to talk to someone earlier this week about user groups and their experience doing a NetSuite user group here in Ohio. Now we're still going to do that conversation, but the day we were supposed to record earlier this week, across Ohio, there were widespread power outages. So power was out here in Columbus, where I'm at. It was also down in Cincinnati, about 2 hours away, where the person I was going to interview was at. So we canceled the interview. And I figured now would be a good opportunity, just use this week to talk about the generic inquiry library that I'm adding to my course. Now, originally, before I built this is for the Building Generic Inquiries and Pivot Tables course that you can find on the top of augforums.com at courses. And originally I was thinking to build something that I was going to call Query Quarry. It's kind of hard to say, the first part of that. Query is for generic inquiry. And then the quarry, the idea was, if you don't know what a quarry is, think of it like a mine, but typically for rocks. Not something like gold, but I think of it like a mine. And the idea was, the way you get data out of Acumatica is with generic inquiries. So that's the query part, and it's like a mine. You need to kind of get down into the data, get dirty, just like you do in a mine, in order to surface the data and get it out of the ground, so to speak, get it out of Acumatica. Once you do that, then you can do interesting things with it. And so that was the idea. The original idea was Query Quarry, but I decided to build the course first because I realized that it's not that useful to have a bunch of sample generic inquiries if you don't know how to use generic inquiries or how to build them, how to modify them. There's a lot of out-of-the-box generic inquiries in Acumatica. A lot of people don't even know they're there. So there's another thing to cover in the course. And so the idea with the course was to empower you to know how to use that tool, and then layer the samples in on top of it. So I decided to do away with the Query Quarry name because it's hard to say and it's maybe overly thought or overly clever. There is a little bit of a nod to Query Quarry though in the new thing that I'm building. See if you can spot it for those of you who are in the course. But I decided to come up with a simpler name, and actually I did an email blast out to the email list to see, give people some options and see which name they preferred. I gave 6 choices: generic inquiry examples, GI examples, generic inquiry samples, GI samples, generic inquiry library, and GI library. 61 people responded, and 25 people voted for GI library. The next closest was 17 people voted for generic inquiry library. So that seemed to be the popular choice there. So I'm going to call this the GI library, but I think within the course I'll call it the GI library, and when I'm talking about it, like I'm doing on this podcast episode, I'll call it the generic inquiry library. Now I found that even though I started with the course, things kind of naturally evolved into the generic inquiry library. Because after building the foundational knowledge area of the course, what I call the foundational knowledge area, I then have a second area that I call the tips and tricks area, where there's some video training lessons on specific tips and tricks. But the more I did tips and tricks lessons, the more I found that it was all about the examples. And so it wasn't so much anymore about the video part and learning how to do the example. It was just about having the example to look at. So I think once you have that base knowledge in place, then it comes down to, all right, let's have as many examples as possible. So that's how I'm adding this third area into the course, the GI library area. So it's taken a little while to build. We had to do some PHP coding on the website to add this into the course, but I'm happy with how it's turning out. I think it looks nice and clean, and I think it's real simple to browse. You just scroll through the examples. I made sure to have screenshots. Eventually I might add in little video demos, which is kind of what the tips and tricks lessons have turned into. They're almost like a demo of the solution and then a real quick show you how to build it. Well, now the idea would be maybe we'd have a demo and just download it and import it into your environment. So the idea is to allow you to browse it easily and see the screenshots of it to see which ones you want to import into your own environment. Then you'd also be able to, and this is something we do have working, you can click into a specific generic inquiry and get the download links there, and then also add comments to it. So you can have a running conversation on a specific generic inquiry, and maybe you have some questions about something you'd like added to it, or a question about how it's working. There's a kind of a social component there. So I think, what my goal with this is that I put out examples on a regular basis, just keep adding to this generic inquiry library. And then you still have a way, it's almost like a private forum. So it is all within the course. So you do have to be in the course in order to access this. But, we can have conversation about the specific generic inquiries that are there. And then, of course, I'm still taking suggestions for ones that people want added into the library. Now, later, I want to launch this, just get it going, get people accessing it, downloading the generic inquiries. There's some tricky things there not tricky, it's just kind of mundane things. You have to, my plan is to have an XML file for each generic inquiry available for download, but I need a download button for each version of Acumatica because the XML files are a little bit different between the versions. So that's just, it's a lot, it's mundane work to generate all that stuff, but I've got someone helping me with the back end of that now, and we're making good progress on that. So I want to launch it with the list, with the screenshots, with the ability to comment on individual generic inquiries, have a conversation about it. And then later I'd like to add in a search component to the GI library, categorize things maybe by module or by addition, like construction, manufacturing, etc. But for now, just launch the list and start adding to it, because I think the examples are really important, but not just to have an example, but be able to ask questions about it and have a conversation on it. So that's it. That's the generic inquiry library preview. Hoping to launch this within the next month or two, by the end of the summer, basically, is my goal to get this launched. And for those who are in the course, you'll just have access to it, just part of the course. I did think originally that maybe I would do a separate course for this specifically, but I've got too many ideas for courses. I'd like to do one on Power BI maybe at some point, but I'm learning that there's a lot of work around launching a course and marketing it and not confusing people with so many courses. So I'm just adding the generic inquiry library into the existing Building Generic Inquiries and Pivot Tables course. And so I'm going to focus on that, and I'd still like to do something with Power BI in the future, maybe even something with Felixo. But I'm kind of leaning towards maybe just adding everything into this one course. Maybe I rename the course at some point. But there's just all sorts of interesting data things that you can do with Acumatica, and generic inquiries as the base. And so I think it might make sense just to keep adding things into the one course. It's not entirely sure on that, but for sure with the generic inquiry library, this will just get added into the existing Building Generic Inquiries and Pivot Tables course. So that's my heads up on that, just using the opportunity this week since the power outage killed my planned episode, that I'd still get an episode out and let you know it's coming. So if you're not in the course, you can check out augforums.com/courses. You'll see a link in there for the monthly webinar that I do. It's a 30-minute webinar, explains the course, plays a sample lesson from the course, and also gives you a coupon code for $300 off the price of the course. And if you join the course, once the generic inquiry library is included or added to the course, you will get access to it. I think there's just so many different ways that you can pull data out of Acumatica with a generic inquiry. So many different techniques, the way you can group things, the way you can filter things, the clever ways you can use parameters, the way you can use pivot tables, just so many different ways to do things and so many different modules to pull from. You can pull from that financial data, the distribution data, manufacturing, CRM data. And there are clever ways that you can link things together. And so I'm really looking forward to just continuing to add to this library with creative examples of generic inquiries. Because no one wants to have to build everything themselves, right? I think that a lot of people get into Acumatica and they're frustrated pretty early on by the lack of out-of-the-box reporting. And so the idea here is to meet that need. Of course, these are generic inquiries only. These are not the report designer, the printable reports, but just helping you to get to the data and giving you samples to look at. And then it's all in the course format. So you take the course, you learn how to build generic inquiries, and then you just use the examples to broaden your skill set and allow you to build more generic inquiries using the examples that you have in the generic inquiry library. So that's all I've got. Let me know what you think. I'm going to actually turn on for, I believe, the first time on this episode page, augforums.com/episode 89. That's episode and the number 8, then the number 9. I'm going to turn on the comments feature on that page. It's actually the same comments feature that I'm enabling in the generic inquiry library area. So feel free to add a comment to this episode. Let me know what you think. Let me know your own ideas for generic inquiries that you'd like to see added to the GI library, and I'll get working on adding those. All right, well, that's it for now. We'll catch you on the next episode of augforums.com Real Talk. Thanks for listening, and take care.